5, 4, 3, 2.
Good afternoon, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of To Your Health with Dr. G, the doctor's in the house. My name is Dr. Mark Gomez, and happy Wednesday. Today, we're going to be talking about designing the next generation corporate wellness plan. Of course, my name is Mark Gomez. I'm a board-certified practicing internal medicine physician at Edward Hospital in Bolingbrook and Naperville, Illinois. Before I introduce my guests, I want to hit you guys with a quick disclaimer. The content of To Your Health with Dr. G is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and that content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, and or treatment. Further details can be found at www.toyourhealthwithdrg.com/disclaimer. Again, my name is Dr. Mark Gomez. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at To Your Health Dr. G. Our sponsor today is Midwest Sports Medicine Institute. They are our platinum sponsor. You can find them at www.gomidwestsports.com. So welcome everybody today. For those that are new to the program, what we do each week is we gather a group of our professional colleagues and we talk about different healthcare topics. Today we're going to be talking about the next generation corporate wellness plan, and in particular we're going to be talking about how do you best design something like this. So before we start and before I introduce my guests, I want to hit you guys with a couple quick facts. Number one, the total amount of healthcare, the total annual cost of healthcare in the U.S. in the year 2016, which is the most recent data, is $3.3 trillion, and that equals to $10,328 per person. That equates to roughly 17.9% healthcare spending, which is our GDP, our gross domestic product. As U.S. health workers, as workers in our country and their health declines, in the rise of more chronic disease burden and increased healthcare costs, we know that employers and other companies have to be very aggressive in how they target healthcare spending on their employees. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about this in general, and how we're going to act like this. We're going to start with a little bit of a historical perspective on how employee wellness programs were kind of conceived and designed over the years, and kind of transition to where they are at now in this new age. And also we're going to be talking about what is the next step. How can we get wellness programs to adjust and adapt to the current century that we're in? A couple other quick announcements. And I really want you guys to understand that when we talk about wellness programs, we're talking about trying to find ways for employees and employers to have equity, to benefit from each other. Because at the end of the day, we know that employers, they do sincerely, we hope if you got a good job, but we hope that your employers really sincerely want you to be happy, healthy, and productive. And on the flip side, employees want to be in an environment where they have inclusion, where they have a holistic approach to their needs. And we do think today that we can find equity on both sides as we design plans. We can engage in healthy behaviors while still for employers to make their bottom line. So what I want to do today is I want to introduce my guests. And I've invited these gentlemen, for those that have seen the show in the past or listened on the podcast. These are two good friends of mine, Mr. Chad Earl and Mr. Larry Love, and they've been on the show before, and I wanted them to come back because they both offer a unique perspective on how they see health, how they see systems, and have they're very ingrained in the design of programs for their clientele. And so I wanted them to come back because I think they offer a great perspective on wellness and wellness design. So first I want to introduce the gentleman to my right, Mr. Larry Love. And some of you guys have already, again, met Larry Love in the past, but Larry Love is the owner of Total Body Wellness and Performance Incorporated, www.totalbodywellness.net. And my other guest, Chad Earl, owner of Integrated Wellness Online and DuPage Fitness and Rehab, www.integratedwellnessonline.com. So, Larry, welcome back to the program. And why don't you give us a quick kind of your take on next generation design of corporate wellness plans?
Well, thanks for having me, Dr. G. It's good to be back, and it's always good to be amongst colleagues and share some good knowledge. As we look at corporate wellness in the past and how it's now evolving to where we're at and kind of where we want it to be, there's a couple things we need to point out. In the past, corporate wellness and design was more about how the employee could be more productive at work. As we evolve to where we are now, corporate wellness has turned into focusing less on absenteeism, but focusing more on presenteeism. In addition, not just focusing on how productivity is accomplished at work, it's what happens outside of the workforce, because corporate wellness is not just about the individual, it's about encompassing the work, the family, and the life balance. So that's kind of where I see it right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Larry, for coming out today, and I look forward to having some more discussion on this topic as we get deeper into where we want to go with this. My next guest, Mr. Chad Earl. Chad, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Dr. G.
Chad, why don't you give us a few kind of opening thoughts on where we're at on this design of wellness, kind of wellness 2.0.
And I think, as Larry pointed out, corporate wellness has a history of productivity, and I think that in the modern day health program, we've kind of fallen in love with metrics and quantitative analysis, right? We like to look at data, and we're always trying to struggle to evaluate what the proper metrics are, what correlates with outcomes. And I think we've gotten away from and devalued some of the qualitative aspects, things that we can't touch, things that we can't weigh and get a value on. And when you think about those things, such as how you feel about your coworkers, how you feel about your employers, how you feel about the outcomes that you produce, that really becomes the drivers of behaviors. You know, it's hard to, everything that we value in our life are things that we don't put quantitative analysis on. You know, when you think about it, you know, you can't really weigh your kids, you can't really weigh your wife, you can't really weigh the relationships you have from a friendship standpoint. And yet, we try to weigh everything else to try to make it have the value for us to sacrifice what we really care about. So I think in corporate wellness, if you don't put proper emphasis on what moves behavior, such as relationships, it's really going to be hard to motivate the individuals in that program.
Excellent. Thank you, Chad. Thank you for coming on the show again today. So, for those of us that are new to the show, and those, of course, that have listened to the show and watch, I always like to start out with kind of the chief complaint, and just kind of give everybody a refresher. The chief complaint in medicine, and what I see on a daily basis, is when somebody comes in for a specific reason. And we call that the chief complaint. And so, in relation to today's topic, our chief complaint is, how do we make the corporate wellness plan better? But before we dive into that, let me give you a little more historical perspective. Right now in this country, more than 50% of companies with at least 50 employees have a wellness program, which is good. The reality is that programs, however vary in design, ranging from very generic to something that's more targeted and high-intensity interventions. Programs may also vary in duration, as well as incentives and rewards that employees may gain. And the reality is that there are limited high-quality clinical and financial data that allow comparison of wellness programs and their impact over time. So what we want to do is kind of look at things and see, here's where it is, but here's how we can get it better. So the traditional design, when you think about employee wellness programs, and probably those of us that are in the workforce, and I can certainly speak on my behalf being an employed physician, the traditional design of employee programs have been really to financially reward participation. And that was either via lower healthcare premiums or maybe some cash back in your pocket on your paycheck. And if you did not engage in that participation, you were essentially penalized through a higher premium. From the employer standpoint, and that was from the employee standpoint, from the employer standpoint, of course, employers always want healthy, engaged, productive employees, and that will lead to more financial success. But a lot of the drawbacks that we see is we see that companies essentially somewhat coercing or forcing their employees into choosing healthy lifestyles, and that's kind of the drawback of the traditional design. Also, employees that did not engage in that behavior were more or less disciplined. and the decision making is solely based on the employee. But the reality is that those kind of traditional programs didn't really give value, it just kind of gave you a quick financial incentive. So what we want to do is kind of get away from that. I want to ask Chad this question. You know, Chad, when you think about like old programs, you know, I think of like, you know, smoking cessation, basic anthropometric measurements, you know, that doesn't really give enough. It's again, as you said, we're kind of a metric-driven society. So where do you see some of the gaps in that, just kind of that basic generic framework of smoking cessation and anthropometrics? Does that really do anything? Does it drive anything?
And I think that, or, you know, so if the question is, you know, is getting people to stop smoking, is that beneficial? And it is beneficial, and it is beneficial to lose weight. And my question then becomes, why did you start in the very beginning? Why are you overweight now? Yes, you're smoking, and yes, you're overweight. And the question I have is not necessarily the proximal reason, but what started the behavior? Because if I understand what's the genesis, then I can get to some of the root causes of it, right? Because otherwise you're looking at manipulation, coercion, persuasion, but you're not looking at changing the person. And, you know, people only change out of love for something or out of fear of something else. And so the research is clear. When you want somebody to change, you really have to understand the relationships in their life that they're going to change for.
Excellent. When I look at some of the things that come across my desk, and I get this all the time from patients of mine that may come in and say, "Here, Dr. G, I did these labs for my employer," and you know, it's just labs and not too much else. Although some of the programs are now adding some other components, maybe a little more of a holistic thing where it's talking about sleep habits or dietary habits or fitness habits. But the reality is that may invite dishonesty. What do you think, Larry, about that one? If somebody's doing maybe a self-reported kind of plan?
Well, you bring up a very important point. Accountability is huge when it comes to a lot of these corporate wellness designs and programs. However, it all starts with what Chad said. You have to see what the beginning looks like. Any type of needs assessment has to involve inclusion, and when an employee feels included in the process, we're going to comply a lot better. Second, most employees, and research indicates this, that when they feel a part of something from the beginning, they're going to comply more, authentically. Now, there's a privacy standpoint to this, and so how much information needs to be shared is all dependent upon how it's developed at the beginning. Many times, a health risk assessment, a needs assessment, if it's too inclusive, it kind of can intimidate the employee. And if you're trying to manipulate or shape the employee to conforming with something that they don't feel comfortable with, then you're going to have, dishonest results. But going back to answering the question in totality, inclusion is key. That shows a lot of authenticity and compliance.
Excellent. One of the things that we always kind of think about when I even try to engage with my patients is what is your company trying to do here? Instead of just giving me some labs, are they trying to do anything to add value to your life? Yes, there's an awareness component if you truly answer those questions honestly, but let's be real, sometimes you just want to just get those questions answered just so you can get that cash in your pocket. So you're almost doing yourself a disservice when you're not taking honesty. But the reality is a lot of companies, and as I said in the beginning, more than 50% of companies in this country that have at least 50 employees have some sort of a wellness plan. But there can be a lot of discrepancies when you say like, okay, I'm a company, I might only have 55 employees and I'm trying to have a wellness plan. I can't afford to have a big, detailed, high-intense, high-touch program. I can only go generic. So what are some of the drawbacks with that? How would we maybe get past that, Chad? If you were maybe looking at, hey, I might only have 50, 60 employees, how can I try to design something that's meaningful if I'm the employer?
Right. And I think part of the design in a corporate wellness plan is the work environment itself. And, a lot of emphasis goes into equitable treatment and trying to create this almost benign an aesthetic environment of respect. But in that, people are really afraid to engage on an intimate level the individuals who work with them. And so, back in the 80s, 70s, yes, the environment was very uniform, as a lot of male workers, not a lot of female, and not a lot of minorities. And in that design, there was a lot of intimacy. People felt that everybody was the same, and everybody had the same goals, and everybody had the same beliefs. And then when you add in diversity, you add in fear, you add in anxiety, you add in unrest, you add in uncertainty, and then you pull back from an intimacy standpoint, and it creates this inner resting now environment of tolerance. And so when you look at the Googles, the Amazons, some of these smaller companies that, as Larry talked about, really include their coworkers, they're having fun, they respect each other, they get to know each other, they work for each other, and they buy into the outcomes of the company. That to me is the substrata of a great corporate healthcare plan. It's the invitation of intimacy in the work environment with respect and decency.
I like the word. I was talking to my wife Tiffany, about this as I was preparing for the show, and my wife had a big corporate world background, and I just have a medical background, so my background is very, very narrow-sighted. But we're talking about that exact concept, and it really comes down to culture, and companies must have that culture that promotes well-being. If your company doesn't have that culture and it's not seen and heard from the top down, it's going to be hard for a regular employee to thrive in that, to as you said, grow, to add value to their life, to enjoy going to work. And that's a big difference. The Googles and the Apples and the Netflixes, they've got the culture that says, hey, I want to work for you, and period. I mean, that's the thing. What do you think, Larry, when you look at larger companies? Certainly they have an advantage of designing these because maybe a lot more capital, but can the larger companies also get a return on that investment?
That's a great question, Dr. G. When we look at a company's missions and values, their mission statement, it's really key, because Malik and Newman, and I'm citing this from a clinical outcomes of wellness programming, 2013, it states in there that the mission and values of any company, if it's aligned with the executive aspect and the employee aspect, you create a culture that is beneficial. You create a culture of productivity. You also create a culture of presenteeism. You also create a culture that is going to be consistent for longevity. Many of these wellness programs and designs are, in a lot of companies, are very short term. They do it, they say, hey, we've done some wellness programming, we've had a wellness event, and then there's no follow-up. What the larger companies have to understand, and what they are understanding, is that this has to be a year-long entity. It's not just for 30 days and then everybody goes back to doing what they're doing. Larger companies are now utilizing the quarterly aspect and follow-up aspect, and they're getting tremendous results because now they understand exactly what the employee needs versus just what the company wants.
It's interesting when you said kind of a year long is a kind of time frame. So yeah, some of the studies that I've looked at in preparation for the show have been 6-month pilot projects or even year-long pilot projects, because you have to give that kind of data. And one of the largest companies out there, at least one of the largest insurers out there in this country, Aetna, they actually did a study back in December, that was published in December 2015, where they looked at a subset of their population, and they found them for a year. And basically what they looked at, the study was actually entitled Reducing Metabolic Syndrome Risk Using a Personalized Wellness Program. And what they did was they looked at people with 2 risk factors for metabolic syndrome, but one of them had to be waist circumference. So metabolic syndrome, for those that are listening to the show or watching us on Facebook Live, metabolic syndrome is a constellation of metrics including waist circumference, triglyceride levels, low HDL or low good cholesterol, hypertension, high blood pressure, or elevated blood sugar, elevated fasting glucose. And when you take those 5 different things in its totality, those risks, if somebody has those, it leads to diabetes, it leads to coronary artery disease, and ultimately can lead to death. And so we look at it in this country, there are about 50 million US adults age 18 through 65 that have that diagnosis. But there's more than 100 million people out there in this country, more than 100 million adults that have at least one or two risk factors. And so what they did with Aetna, they basically took patients, took their employees and invited them into a program. So we're talking about intervention, and we're talking about some of the things that you can do with this high touch. And so you were either invited to the program or not invited eventually. And so when they invited people to the program, they gave them the tools, that personal touch that Chad was alluding, that well, not even alluding, that Chad said, the personal touch and that high contact. And they said, all right, we're going to follow you out for a year, and we're going to see what our savings is, or what's our healthcare reduction in that population of individuals that have gotten all the tools, the counseling, the nutrition, the fitness plan. And even what they did in this study, they looked at a little bit of voluntary, it was a voluntary thing, but they looked at genes, the genetic makeup, to understand people that have risk for metabolic syndrome. And bottom line is they found out that they saved $122 in total healthcare costs per participant per month. And that equated to $600,000 in savings in 1 year that was reinvested back into the company. And so we talk about return on investment, you can get it, but it's gotta be designed properly. Now, Aetna's again a large company, so how do the small companies do this for their employees? So let me ask you this question, Chad. Say you're an employer, you know, you sit down at the table with your employees and you say, hey, we're gonna try to design something together. How would you engage your employees in saying what they want? How do you do that? Because again, the models of old would say, here, you're just gonna mark this that you're not a smoker or you are a smoker, and you give me a couple of anthropometric measurements, and that's it. How would you design something theoretically
Sure.
in that kind of scenario?
I think as Larry talked about, you're gonna start with a needs assessment, like a small focus group that represents your workforce. I mean, if you have females, you have males, you have older, you have younger, what kind of minority demographics do you have? And so you wanna understand first your population. And then secondly, where in your company is the life cycle of your population? Are these retirement age? Are these young and upcoming? Are these middle age with kids? Because that's gonna contribute to a lot of their emotional anxiety and their work-life balance, as Larry talked about. And so when you design a corporate health program for adults, right, you have to partner with an adult person. You can't tell adults what to do, right? You can't parent an adult person. Life would be easier if you could, but you can't. And so adult people do what's in their best interest to do. That's what adults do. And so you have to partner with them and explain to them how the company is saving money, the company has more resources, we can create more jobs, more growth in the company, more income. And so now, by getting healthier as an individual, you're creating more economic opportunity for you. You're creating more hiring, you're creating more of an impact in your community. And so it's not just that you're going to have as an individual a longer life, a more vital life. You're also going to have a stronger company, more job stability, more ascension up in the ranks, more growth. And so when you talk about health, yes, we want to look better, feel better, live longer, but we also want some of the economic returns. And if you look at adult people, most people will say, well, I sacrifice my health to create more economic opportunity. That's why I don't work out. I don't have the time. I'm working too much. But what if you can combine the two and give people both health and economic return? And I think you can with a well-designed corporate healthcare plan.
I think it's great when you say you need to get people to the table, and you know, it's interesting because I work for a hospital and I'm not involved in those kind of discussions, so I can't comment on whether or not our hospital has the employees come to the table. But that's a great option out there, and it actually gives the workforce options, because your kind of wellness, what's important to you, if we're on the same team, may be different than me. It's not a one size fits all. Maybe your thing is that you wanna have some dedicated green space on work, or maybe you want to do something, Larry, maybe you want to be able to say, I want to do yoga, because I think, Larry, you would be great at yoga, right?
We're very flexible with that.
Yeah, so I think you'd be great at that. And maybe for me, my design is I want to be able to coach my kids, baseball game. And so how can you be flexible?
Right.
An employer's got to be flexible, but they got to offer options. But knowing that if they do that successfully and it's designed the right way, they can get the productivity, they can get the health out of their workers, they can get the happiness, they can get the relationships, as you mentioned, and hopefully at the end of the day, the bottom line, aka the return on that investment, is there. Everybody can benefit. So let me ask you the next question. How can employers partner with local healthcare practitioners to realize their wellness programming goals and get the best health possible out of their workforce? And I'm thinking in particular about the companies that only have a smaller workforce versus the larger companies. Yes, they certainly have a medical team within their chief medical officer part of their company, or they contract with other companies that can do medical testing. But how does a smaller company, is there any benefit on partnering with your local team, your local medical doctor, your local fitness facility? Is there any benefit in that?
Yeah. It's a huge benefit, but before even a small company can do that, they have to look at two ratios, and it goes back to presenteeism and absenteeism. If your employees are absent, you need to figure out why. Is it because of injury? Is there a common theme with injury? Low back injuries, which account for 50% of all work-related injuries. Is it environmental? Is it, hey, you know what, it's too hot up in here, I can't concentrate. My asthma is off the chain, So when you look at certain entities of absenteeism, the whys that are contributing to that, now we gotta look at why are the employees present? What's making them happy? And so what's making them happy, what's making them productive, and once you kind of look at those ratios, now you can say, hey, you know what, we need this kind of appropriate medical intervention. We need this kind of appropriate, allied health intervention. So if you have a small company that that there's a high obesity rate or potential for obesity, you're gonna address that. You're gonna address that through some coaching. You're gonna address that through, again, some health literacy, but you're also going to have some interaction with some type of health and wellness and fitness professional. Also, you want to, get a doctor involved that's going to say, hey, this is what it looks like to have, metrics. And although metrics get kind of, misused and overused, we still need to know where people are versus where they need to be. So when it talks about involving either people in the community or other, outreach programming, we have to know what the people need first. And if a company is really authentic and true about getting results for their employees, they have to take time to listen to the employees to understand, hey, these are our issues, these are our challenges. Now, it's the company's accountability to go out and understand what's in the community and bring those people either in or be able to refer them. And so, as you know, a great system and model is doctor referral. Okay, the doctor now refers to some type of allied health professional, and now we bring everybody to the table for some good follow-up and then an action plan.
And there's no doubt, we've talked about a lot on the show, for those that have been following us since the beginning, that the most important thing is for you to get a physical. And getting a physical is not meaning going to get labs done, basic labs done through your employer. You can't just have labs, you gotta have somebody listen to you and hear your story and do a proper physical exam. So we always talk about establish the fact that you're not dying first, and then you can start living. So on that kind of note there, I'm trying to live, yes, we want to live, yes. This next segment is brought to you by our platinum sponsor, Midwest Sports Medicine Institute. Whether competitive athlete or weekend warrior, you expect nothing but the best. Injury or chronic pain in the knee, shoulder, and other joints can be disabling and frustrating. At Midwest Sports Medicine Institute, we strive for excellence in the diagnosis, treatment, and follow-up care of your condition. If you have sustained an injury or are suffering with chronic pain, schedule a consultation with Dr. David Burt to take the first step toward relief and experience the latest advances in orthopedic and sports medicine treatment. Contact the practice today at area code 815-267-8825 or visit www.gomidwestsports.com. So I want to ask the next question to Chad, because I like how this conversation is going, like this like back and forth. But this is an important concept. So let me ask you again. I want you to put on the employer hat again. So here's my question for you. How do you walk the line? Again, knowing that your employees have, we're just looking at statistics. Employees got medical conditions.
Right.
This is the health of the U.S. Worker and workforce.
Yeah.
So how do you walk the line between, walking the line between encouraging your workforce to be healthy, and not necessarily forcing them to be healthy? Because at the end of the day, as an employer, you're spending more money taking care of your workforce, covering their healthcare costs.
Right. And I think that gap is obviously first education, right? People tend to struggle with the unknown. People tend to associate the unknown with whatever experience that they've had in the past. And so if someone was to tell you that, you have to go down this path, the only thing you can think about is what you would do or what you did in the past to achieve the results. And so when someone says, hey, you need to lose weight, you instantly think about how you did it last time, not understanding new strategies, right? If someone said, hey, you need to go back to medical school, you would say, God, medical school, Jesus, I don't know if I can go back to medical school right now. What if it was online? What if it was virtual? What if it was... But you don't think about that. You think about being in class. You think about walking into school. You think about... So I think when you bring on corporate health and you start, quote unquote, positioning outcomes that you want, people instantly start to moaning and groaning and say, oh my God, weight loss, oh, that's going to be painful. Nothing but vegetables, nothing but water, no carbohydrates, or whatever the case. A lot of aerobics. And you're like, well, that's an approach, but what if I gave you a strategy that didn't involve that? Well, what would that be? So I think that as an employee, or as an employer rather, you have to get out ahead of that anxiety with a good educational foundation for your employees first. Education precedes any change that you want to put in place. And then second, what keeps change possible is concern. Genuine concern for the individual. We know that change involves some level of emotional or physical pain. That involves all change. And so that's not really an issue. The issue is people who do change have an emotional consideration that allows them to push past the pain. That's what allows them to keep going. And so if someone says, Doc, how was medical school? You say, it was pretty tough. Well, why did you keep going? Well, you were encouraged from your parents, from your teachers, from your community. But if someone told you every time you had something difficult to stop, to quit, hey, get out of it, at some point you would say, you know what, this is difficult, I'm stopping. And so I think as an employer, I would get ahead of my employees with a good education program and tell them that I am partnering with them. I understand that you need to get more money, I understand that you have young families, I understand that you guys want to retire, and I'm going to package this to allow you to achieve your goals as we achieve ours.
Excellent. I think, I think of these examples where I've seen people come in that are very productive workers. They may be a little bit overweight. They might have an elevated BMI, maybe 31, 33, something, maybe in the 35s.
Mm-hmm.
Even some people that are in the morbid obesity category. Very incredibly productive workers with good job satisfaction. And it's interesting because the reality is that, yes, the cost of managing that person for the employer is actually higher than somebody who doesn't necessarily have some of those medical conditions. Let me ask you this question, Larry. Would you rather have a person that may have a little bit of medical risk, maybe a little bit overweight, but very productive, versus somebody who's got a normal BMI who may be frazzled all the time? If you were like the employer?
Yeah, from an employer's perspective, consistency is really what leads to productivity. Consistency of days that they're actually at work, and that person that may have a couple medical issues, but is a pleasant person, the other employees get along with, you can depend on them, those are really huge keys towards productivity versus the cannonball that may be ultimately healthy, but you don't know which person you're going to get that day. That can be a challenge. And so one of the things that we haven't quite mentioned when we talk about corporate wellness is the mental health factor, okay? And so with that being said, you know, it's pretty amazing when we think of corporate wellness, corporate design, corporate health, we kind of think of just the physical aspects. But that whole mental health capacity, that can create a lot of drama on the job. And guess what? That may cost you more than that person with a couple physical health ailments. So, you know, the person with the physical health ailments, you can create interventions for them. You can create programming for them. Mental health, we can't always see, right? And so, to answer your question, I'd much rather have the person with a couple physical ailments. Yeah.
Thank you for that commentary. You know, it's interesting, I think about, you know, again, all talking about how do you walk that line, and honestly, as a physician, I want all my patients to be as healthy as possible. I want them to have all the resources they need to meet their health goals, and those are the goals that they decide for themselves. And it's interesting, when I talk about, when I have people come in and that's one of the first questions I ask them for all my new patients, and even revisiting with my old patients, I ask them, what's important to you? If you give me a top 3 health goals, and just give it to me. And most of my patients, when they hear that question, they say, well, no doctor's ever actually asked me that question before. Nobody's ever taken the time to try to get to understand who I am as a person. Right. And I think having that moment to understand, again, talking about understanding your workforce, if you sit down and say, what's important to you? You know, obviously, we want to be productive in our jobs. I would hope we want to be productive in our lives, and our families, and our communities. We want to make some money. Let's be honest. We want to make some money. We don't want to be stuck in the same job that's not giving me any value in return, any happiness in return for the rest of our careers. The reality is sometimes we do find ourselves in that situation. But when I say, hey, what are your top health goals? Rarely, though, do I get that answer about, I wish my health goal is to make my work better. Of course, the top goals that I get is, you know, lose weight, lose weight, be the last one. But it's interesting with the mental health aspect, because you're going into an environment on a daily basis, well, 5 days a week we'll call it, say the weekends you get your free time, but you're going to that environment on a daily basis with a group of adults from different backgrounds potentially, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, maybe longer. You're going to do that for 30 years. Right. And you can imagine how sometimes the environment itself can either let you thrive or fail. So let me ask you this question, Chad. How do you make the environment more holistic, knowing that you have to, and we're trying to provide, employers are trying to provide the right environment to make their workers very successful, but when you get to some kind of interpersonal dynamics, and certainly the toxic relationships, how do you make that work? You know, obviously you're not going to you're not going to have, all right, break up teams or anything like that, but how do you make that work in making health, wellness, mental health work, pleasurability? How do you make that work in a design?
Well, that's a great question, and in organizations today, we still see that being a large struggle, trying to find what becomes taboo, what becomes acceptable, and it does go back to the word that you started with, which is culture and leadership. And in certain job settings, intimacy is looked at different levels. I mean, I ran a sports organization for about 20 years in Naperville, and we coached very talented young girls in basketball, for example. And my brothers coached a basketball organization. I worked for a hospital for a number of years. And you find that communication and intimacy is looked at very differently in different settings. I now work at the college setting. And so then you hear and go to the meetings and try to understand on what levels are you allowed to communicate, on what levels are you allowed to show compassion and concern from an interpersonal standpoint, from a communication standpoint. And so you take that and try to say, okay, let's build a culture here of intimacy, of concern, of genuine outcomes. And without good leadership, and as Larry talked about, constant buy-in with the employees, you get off track very easily. And so I think to do that in a very profound way, you would need to work very close with a focus group that represents your organization's employees to make sure that you're still relevant with the employees' need. These things change at least on an annual basis. And I think you need to have leadership that's reflective of the employees that they manage. It's very tough to get somebody to change any behavior that they don't think leadership is buying into themselves. And so nobody wants to go to somebody who's overweight, who's smoking, telling you to lose weight and stop smoking. No, nobody wants to go to a person that says you need to exercise, but they don't exercise. So it's just very hard then from a model to have behaviors managed and talked about that are not reflected in the leadership of that organization.
I like when you're talking about having that task group or that focus group. In medicine, we always like to use the word, have a follow-up. You come with a plan, but you got to follow up with this. And so the dialogue has to be ongoing between employers and employees.
No doubt.
And the reality is that it's been traditionally one-sided,
Mhm.
and this is how it's going to be. But when we talk about designing the new age wellness plan, it's got to be equitable. Both parties can benefit, but you have to really understand your workforce. That's the biggest thing that I can think of. So, Larry, let me ask you this question: what kind of things can employers do? Maybe I thought of a couple examples, but you understand the corporate world a lot better than I do. But I think of like little things that employers can do to slightly, I don't want to call it like a veil and kind of cover up things and say, hey, we want you to be healthier. But there are things that employers can do in their facilities. So I thought of some things like have a walking path, or what other kind of things do you think of?
Yeah.
I think that's where I just got off. I just said have a walking path, but that's me as a physician,
Step one.
not me.
Step one, a walking path.
Got it.
Have a
Check.
green room,
Right.
a lunch room. We have a break room that's very tiny in our office
Sure.
and our medical practice, so it's not really conducive to proper healing and holistic behaviors. But what are some examples that you come up with for employers to design little things that may go the long way?
And that is not only a great observation, but a great question. Sure, a walking path is great. However, when you look at most companies don't work on the outside; they work on the inside. Most employees work on the inside. So little things like when they're in their break room, you can have different recommendations that are on a wall. If there is a particular cafeteria that's within a company, okay, what they're serving at the cafeteria. If you happen to have a kind of incentivized reward day, shooting them donuts opposed to maybe fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, giving them some literacy on how to eat healthy. Those are really good things. Another aspect is this right here. We always talk about, hey, you need to exercise more. You need to exercise more. How about bringing in someone, okay, to show them how to exercise, to show them how to maximize, their hours throughout the day. Now, smaller companies cannot always afford certain things on a more frequent basis, but when they can do it, utilize the right professional to do it. Many companies, it's one thing to gather secondhand information, but to get a qualified, credentialed professional, that's great leadership to me. That now you can denote that to your employees, and that generally will provide some in-house compliance.
Chad, what are some examples that you could think of, or even maybe put yourself in the employee hat? What would you kind of want if your employer's trying to offer something to be as successful as he can be?
I think one thing that's often overlooked is, and me and Larry talk about this often, is the cultural competency. Change is difficult, and change is incredibly difficult if you think people wanting you to change doesn't like you. I mean, it's very tough to take discipline, to take correction, to take advice even from individuals who don't look like you, talk like you, speak like you, value you. And it's very challenging, and a lot of people don't give that any credence. They say, you know, someone's just trying to, you know, advise you. Well, okay, but, you know, we have a strong cultural identity. And so, you know, no one's bringing, you know, Indian food in the cafeteria. No one's bringing soul food in. No one's bringing in their culture into the organization. And so if you have a certain demographic that's strong or have a strong presence, what a statement it would be to say to bring yoga or to bring Tai Chi or to bring maybe some recreational sports from a league standpoint. If people have this background, right? That's what we talk about when we're talking about partnering. I'm not interested in what you want me to do. I'm interested in what I want to do. So if you can help me do what I want to do and it benefits you, then now we have a partnership. You know, and people have kind of have undermined that and just said, well, this is good to do, you should like doing it. And it's like, well, I don't like that. Well, why don't you like that? You know, and so versus trying to understand what the person does like, and then, as Larry talked about, bring in the individual to align the individual to do more of what they like. It's kind of novel, but it's something that it can go a long way.
You know, I always talk about it in my office, and I joke around my office staff. I say, wouldn't it be nice to have, during our lunch break, to have like a massage therapist in there? I think that would bring morale up very high.
Right.
But morale's already high. But little things like that, I mean, companies can be very creative. I love that example of the cultural competency. Why not do something like that if that's your workforce? Why just do something to engage in rewarding things from a holistic standpoint instead of just a physical standpoint. So we got about 5 minutes left. So what we like to do at the end of, as we wrap up each show, I always like to call it, we did the chief complaint at the beginning, again, how would you design, how can you make the corporate wellness plan better? But kind of an assessment plan, what we do in medicine, of course, is when you're done with seeing a patient, you kind of come with a game plan. And certainly that game plan includes a follow-up. So I want to ask Chad and Larry to kind of just give me kind of a few take-home points for consumers out there, whether it's from an employer standpoint or from an employee standpoint, whoever's listening. But give me a few take-home points to be aware of when somebody's participating or designing a corporate wellness plan. I'll start with Larry.
From an employer standpoint, leadership must lead. They must lead by example. An accountability of leadership from an employer standpoint is they're responsible for walking a walk. They want other people to walk, especially their employees. Whether that's getting the right personnel in there, credentialed personnel for any type of intervention, whether it's saying, hey, we're doing this, we're in this together. But the employer must also be willing to also understand that inclusion is going to create compliance. Now, from the employee standpoint, there's also an accountability. If the employer is offering you an opportunity to be healthier, to feel better, look better, perform better, you can't have it both ways. You can't sit there and pick apart a program if they're offering you something. So compliance is key from the employee standpoint, but also the employee must be willing to speak up upon what their needs are. You can never blame someone for not providing what you need if you don't tell them what you need. So it's a reciprocal aspect between both the employer and the employee, but synergistic at best. So when they work together, you can have great wellness and corporate programming.
Excellent. Chad, a few take-home points?
Yeah, I would echo Larry's points in making sure that you have, from an employee standpoint, a focus group that is communicating with the higher-ups and letting them understand what's important and what's important now. I mean, when you start working at an organization versus being there for 10 years versus being there for 20 years, you know, those needs change. And so the worst thing for providing something, as Larry talked about, is providing something that somebody no longer needs. I mean, that is terrible, because now you're investing resources into something that your organization no longer requires. From an employer standpoint, I would say partner with the employees. Avoid that unilateral, old school, top-down, authoritative type of leadership style.
Dictator.
Yeah, to make it very simple, dictatorship. It doesn't always work the best with adults. And so you want to try to partner and look at the partnership as providing a win-win, as I talked about, the synergistic outcomes for both you and the employees.
Excellent. And my final thoughts are really that corporate wellness programs do work, but they have to be designed properly with mutual goals and follow-up plans in mind. Employers can do a lot by listening to their employees, and employees can learn a lot from listening to their employers, but the goals have to be shared and mutual, because together you can still have happiness on the job, you can be healthy on the job, and you can still be productive on the job, and that will benefit everyone. So, thanks a lot, everybody, for listening. Again, my name is Dr. G. I want to thank Mr. Chad Earl and Mr. Larry Love.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks, guys, for coming out. I want to thank my sponsor today, Midwest Sports Medicine Institute, www.gomidwestsports.com. Check me out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at To Your Health, Dr. G. Next week, we're going to be talking about Summertime Countdown. We're going to be doing a countdown series to summer. It's going to be part 1, Preventing Injury. Check me out, guys. Take care. Thanks a lot for listening. Bye-bye.
Show.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Excellent. Good discussion, fellas.